Yes, it's finally the part you've all been waiting for. It's time to set up your character layers. This was originally going to be part of part 3, but there are so many steps I realized I needed to break things down a bit more. We're going to be using the Puppet tool a little differently than it was originally intended to be used. It was designed for a single layer puppet, but when you try to animate a character that way, it gives you a very wiggly result. It's what I refer to as the bendy elbows problem. It's great for deforming or reshaping a layer or making old-timey cartoons, but it won't give you anything close to realistic movement. And if you try using all 15 points of your KinectToPin tracking data with a flat puppet, the result is unfortunate. I just don't think legs should bend like that. However, if you only have 2 puppet pins on a layer, you get a completely different effect. Instead of making it go all wibbly, they work sort of like multiple anchor points with the layer stretched between them. You actually get a nice stretch and swash effect as well. So that's why we're putting the source data on one layer and using expressions to link to it to control separate pieces. As if this process wasn't complicated enough already, it also makes building your character a little more work. Instead of just creating a single layer, you need to build your puppet out of lots of little pieces so that it can rotate whenever there's a joint. You need a hand, a forearm, an upper arm, and so forth. One thing is a bit easier though. Instead of having to use the Puppet tool's layer overlap feature, you can change what part of your character is in front by simply changing the layer order. This also means that if you have an element that needs to be in front of some layers and behind others, like the head of a character with long hair, you need to make it 2 separate layers, and you have to rig both of them. You can use your own preferred technique to create your puppet, whether it's drawn or cut up in Photoshop, created in Illustrator, or even generated via After Effects shape layers like this one. I've used this process with everything from Illustrator vectors to pieces cut out of vintage photos and artwork, but for this demo I used shape layers so I could give it a single AEP file with no dependencies. You can't just cut up a flat puppet or photo, unfortunately. You need to give each layer a little bit of overlap with the ones it connects to so the puppet doesn't come apart at the joints. Also, if you're importing your layers from another program, make sure to crop them to the layer dimensions on import, not the comps, so you aren't dealing with unwieldy giant rectangles the whole time. Regardless of your design technique, be sure the layers are decently high resolution so you have some flexibility in how close you can zoom in on them. Even if your character is made of vectors, you're going to lose some sizing flexibility when you add the puppet pins. Here's why. When you first add pins, the Puppet tool works by creating a mesh of your layer at that layer's original resolution. And you can't use collapse transformations on a layer with a Puppet tool instance. It breaks everything. So you want each piece as big as possible at this point. All the scaling down needs to happen inside the Puppet animation comp, and all the scaling up needs to happen once that comp is nested elsewhere. Don't worry if the raw elements are actually bigger than your animation comp itself. Even though the Puppet comp is only 640 by 480, you can scale back up into HD later as long as you plan things right at the start. Because you can apply collapse transformations to the Puppet comp once it's nested in a larger comp. In short, make sure all your layers are nice and big at the point the Puppet tool gets to them. If you're using vector or shape layers, you need to pre-compose them before you apply the Puppet tool. Same goes for if you have a layer that's going to contain animation inside itself, such as lip sync on a head. Make your pre-comp the size of the layer at 100% scale, not the size of the Puppet comp, or you'll lose the ability to enlarge it later. Okay, so you've got everything loaded in, pre-composed, in the right scale? Good. Now you can connect it to the template you built in part 3. You're going to be linking puppet pins to the expression point controls in the template. The easiest way to do this is to open up multiple effects palettes for the different control layers down the side of the screen. You can do this by clicking the lock icon in the effects window, then opening the next one right below it, locking that one, and so on. Having all the points visible makes it really easy to pick whip the right one. And that's all of them. Let's start with the left lower leg. I tend to hide all the layers I'm not currently rigging so I don't get confused. So use the Puppet tool to create a pin where you want the ankle pivot to be, then one where you want the knee pivot to be. When you created these pins, the Puppet tool also created the mesh it's going to use to deform the layer. And you can see it by clicking the Show Mesh checkbox if you want. And if you want to make sure the edges of your limb don't get cropped off, you can set the mesh expansion up to about 5 or so. If things seem really slow, you can also drop the number of triangles way down, and that should help. But if you have too few triangles, things won't curve smoothly. Now, hit U to show the keyframes on the timeline. For pin 1, alt-click the stopwatch, then type from comp, and pick whip the left ankle control point from the left leg layer. Then close the parentheses. The from comp transformation makes the Puppet tool understand where to put the pins relative to the layer's dimensions, instead of to the comp as a whole. Now do the same thing, but link it this time to the left knee. Then scale down the layer until it appears to be a sensible size and proportion. If you've built your character all at once, you're going to scale down all the layers to this size. Try scrubbing through the timeline. Congratulations, you've successfully animated a shin. You're going to follow the same basic pattern for the upper and lower arm and leg pieces. Add a from comp layer space transform, then choose the relevant point control. The torso, hands, feet, and head work differently though, so save them for last. So let's do the left upper leg. Let's do a point on the knee, and then a point on the hip joint. The knee pin gets the same expression it had on the lower leg layer. It's from comp, and then we connect to the knee pin, and then we close the parentheses. The hip joint gets connected to the left hip point. I think you can see where this is going. Now scale it down till it looks like it's the right size. And hey, you've got a leg. Next we're going to do the same thing but on the right side of the body. Let's start with the right lower leg. Add the right ankle and the knee point. This time we're going to do from comp and connect the right ankle. And from comp and connect to the right knee. And again, scale down, and this time we're going to match the scale that you used for the other lower leg. You can always tweak this again later. Now for the upper leg, yet again we add the knee point and the hip point. And just like before, we're going to use from comp and connect them to their points on the control layers. And scale it down until it looks less blobby and matches the other upper leg. If it looks like the legs are bending backwards or on the wrong side, you should check or uncheck the invert pins box now, so you can do the rest of your rigging more easily. But now we're going to move on to the arms. For the forearm, you need to add pins to the right wrist and the right elbow. And it's just like the legs. This time we're going to connect from comp and pick whip the right wrist. Then from comp and pick whip the right elbow. And scale it down. The upper arm works just the same way. You got the right elbow and the right shoulder. From comp, right elbow. From comp, right shoulder. And scale it down. Now we're going to do the left arm. And I think you can probably figure out how that's going to work. Left wrist, left elbow. Add the expression and connect them up. Scale it down. Now for the upper arm, left elbow, left shoulder. Almost done. Scale that one down to match the other arm. And you can really start seeing the motion capture track working. Now we'll do the torso. This is a little bit trickier, but we're actually okay with it bending and flexing, so it gets 5 points. The hip and shoulder pins at the corners, as well as the waist pin right in the middle. And you're going to connect them the same way you linked up the limbs. There's just 5 of them. All you need to worry about here is that you're using the same left and right you used on the arms and legs. So it's going to be from comp, left hip, from comp, right hip, from comp, left shoulder, from comp, right shoulder, and for that pin in the middle, we're going to use the waist pin on the spine layer. And don't forget the from comp at the beginning of that. And scale it down until it looks roughly human. You could also add the neck pin if you wanted, but whether that works well really depends on the design of your character. This character has a built-in neck. You can have it be separate. It's up to you. So now it's time to take a look at how things are moving and how they look in proportion to each other. I always spend some time experimenting with the size of the different pieces and with the position of the different pins until I get everything connected up and moving the way I want. It's moving pretty well though. If it seems like a shoulder pin is in the wrong place, for instance, you can delete it and create a new pin in a different spot. In this case, I actually want to adjust the legs. The knees look kind of weird. The Puppet tool will keep using the same underlying mesh, however, so you don't have to worry about recreating that unless you change the shape of your layer. Since all we want to do is change where the pins are, what we have to do is copy the expression, delete the pin we originally had, put it back in a different spot that we think is going to work better, and add the same expression again. One thing that's really important to point out here, I kind of just mentioned it, is that if you make any changes to the shape of the layer itself, if you redesign your character, you need to delete more than just the puppet pins. You actually need to delete the entire puppet effect instance. Otherwise, it's going to keep on using the old outdated layer mesh. This is also why you can't copy and paste my puppet pins to your own character. And even if you download the tutorial templates, you have to actually rig this part yourself. That looks like a little bit better knee. Let's tweak the other one. I'd probably mess with this a bit more, but for tutorial's sake and sake of time, we'll say that's pretty good. Let's try tweaking the hip pins on the torso though, because that's not quite moving the way I want it to. Let's see if this will work. I'm trying to get the shirt to flare out a little more, to look a little more floaty and more fabric-y. That's actually worse. Let's try that again. And again, paste the same piece of expression. Ah, that's a little better. But now I want to do that to the other hip. And paste that in again. Oh, pasted the previous expression. So this time we need to replace right with left. I copied the wrong thing. But we can just reconnect. Ah, that's much better. That's much floatier and flarier. Is that even a word? Next, we're going to attach the hands and feet. These are actually really quick and easy because you don't need the puppet tool for these, and you don't need the from comp layer space transform either. However, instead of a pin, you're going to apply the expression to the layer's position transform. So let's turn on one of the hands. And we're just connecting it to its wrist. It's that simple. Now to get it, obviously it's not animating yet, and we're going to need to animate the rotation of the hand manually. It's the one thing you have to do by hand. You could probably write a script to automate it a bit, but I find you actually want to do it for expression reasons. You probably want to be able to move it yourself. You can also adjust the anchor point of the wrist to change how the hand is connected to the arm. But it actually looks like it's rotating pretty well. I might want to move it just slightly over. That looks good. And let's do the left hand. This time we're connecting it to the left wrist. And that looks pretty good. Maybe a little bit of a nudge. There we go. And again, enable rotation, and now you have a hand that looks a lot more natural. Let's do the feet. Work exactly the same as the hands, except you're going to connect them to the ankle points. Nudge it over a bit. And a little anchor point adjustment to get it where you want it. And there you go. You've got a whole rigged body. The last thing we're going to rig is the head. You have a couple of choices at this point. If you want to animate head tilt yourself, or if you have a head that's going to change shape from frame to frame, like if you have a character that's talking and the jaw moves, or if their hair moves, or if they have just different facial expressions, you should attach it the same way you did the hand and foot, by pushing the head's anchor point to the bottom and linking its position transform to the neck point control. Again, you can adjust the anchor point and the scale. There we go. That's about right, a little higher up. I find the head more than anything else needs nudging to be put in the right place. If you connect it this way though, you have to animate rotation the same way you did with the hands and feet manually. If you want to use the Puppet tool to connect the head, instead of connecting the position keyframe to the control layers, you're going to use puppet pins like you did on the limbs. You add one at the neck point, and another one in the middle of the face. I find the head data is the most unreliably tracked and also the most sensitive to slight variation, so I actually split the X and Y positions up for these keyframes. Here's the expression I used. I do X equals, and I connect to the X values of the layer control. And then I do Y, add a semicolon, do Y equals, and connect to the Y value. Another semicolon, and then I do from comp, parentheses, and then I have X comma Y in brackets, which is an array of all the points, and that looks terrifying. Let's connect the other one before we adjust this. Again, for this one we're going to use the head point. So use the X coordinate and the Y coordinate. And from comp, X comma Y. Not great, but it's a lot better than it was. And the advantage of splitting things up is that now we can add a little bit of math on the end to shift things. Particularly for the Y coordinates, this is really valuable. I just eyeball this because stretching a face even a pixel or two is noticeable in a way that stretching a forearm isn't. And I just try different numbers until I find ones that I think work. So let's hit play and check out the results. You now have a fully rigged Kinect-controlled puppet, and all you have to do to change its actions is to paste new tracking data to the source layer. Stay tuned for part 5 for finishing techniques, including a more advanced way to animate the hands and feet, a quick and dirty trick to automate lip sync, and how to bring your puppet into HD. Thanks for watching. For more information or to download the project files to work along with this tutorial, head to victorianice.com.